time doing this. Thanks, guys. Yeah. Um, so, in January of 2015, I had just come out as trans to the love of my life. I was in Florida. I was broke, and I was back home with my very religious mother, who was very excited to get me reacquainted with an old friend named Jesus. And a friend called me, and he asked me if I wanted to come with him to Ukraine one day for 2 months to do a documentary. It was a year since the Maidon massacre in 2014, and Russia was about to start annexing Crimea, which meant we needed to get over there with cameras. And I'm a documentary filmmaker and a filmmaker at large in general. So I decided that would be a great way to run away from this feeling of transitioning, because I don't know if you guys have experienced it, it kind of sucks. So I went on a plane, I got to Ukraine, I got to Kiev, and we started shooting, and about a month and a half into it, about 2 months into it, in March, we realized that the shoot wasn't going that well. Things were getting beleaguered. It was very hard to film Crimean refugees and soldiers and film the atrocities without feeling a bit out of touch with a world that was unlike our own here in America. And one of the things that was the hardest for me was realizing how much of a guy I had to be over there. I was 250 pounds at that point, a lot heavier than I am now, and had a pretty big beard and looked to a lot of Ukrainians like a Turkish person, which I don't know if you've been to Ukraine, and they don't like Turks. And I found that out the hard way from a bunch of cops every now and then. Ukraine had been declared a police state halfway during my stay there, and one particular night, we were at a bar, and I was feeling particularly melancholy and decided to go for a walk. We had a couple friends who were these beautiful, beautiful Ukrainian women. I don't know if you've heard about them. They tend to mail them off. That's how pretty they are. This one particularly caught my eye, and I realized that what I thought was an attraction was actually good old-fashioned envy. I decided to go for a walk outside, which I tend to do. I like to go for long walks late at night. And on my late-night walk, I ruminated on what I could do with this desire, if I could transition at all, if it was even possible. And I determined that it probably wasn't, and that I would probably end up a freak or a monster, and decided it'd probably be better off if I just died. And what happened next was pretty serendipitous. A young man, about 6'5", probably about 250 himself, saw me and decided he would like to beat me up. So we we got in a fight. He just came at me randomly on the street, and it was a busy street. People were walking by, but in Ukraine, you don't really help in that situation. It's a bit of an awkward environment, and I realized that I wanted him to keep hitting me. I wanted him to keep hurting me because I wanted to be punished for this feeling. He, however, was pretty high and didn't really know how to land a punch to save his life. So it wasn't really going anywhere. And after about 5 minutes of that, rather than get caught by the cops, which would put me in a lot more trouble than him, I decided to run back to the bar. Now, in Ukraine, it's a very old city. It used to be the Ottoman Empire, the center of it, and as such, there are lots of hills that would be great for carriages and horses, but are terrible for running. And the sidewalks occasionally go from being level to being about 7 or 8 feet high. And I decided in my effort to get back to the bar to run on one of these sidewalks. And as I was running, the sidewalk got higher and higher, and he kept coming after me. And when I hit the bar, I decided to jump down off the sidewalk, and he jumped on my back, and we both cracked my knee. As you can see here. After that, the fight got worse. He started beating the hell out of me. Missing every 4 or 5 punches, and I ended up fighting him off, and in the process realizing that I not only wasn't going to die, but I'd probably end up in a lot of trouble and didn't want to end up in a Ukrainian prison, so I didn't want to hurt him. I finally got him to leave and hopped down to the bar. This was a dive bar, a self-proclaimed metal-themed dive bar that played Nirvana and reggae. And lo and behold, I'd made friends early that night with a jazz band. And the jazz band, upon me coming down on one leg, got really mad and charged up the stairs like a bunch of Cossacks or Vikings and ran this guy down and beat him within an inch of his life. Brought him back in a car covered in blood, brought him down to the basement, brought him into the back room, and put him at my lap and told me I could do whatever I wanted with him. He was covered in blood, had arterial blood, bright orange blood leaking down his face, and completely dilated pupils. He had no idea what was going on and did not remember me for the life of him. So I told him to let him go. And I got in a car and went to the ER. The ER in Ukraine doesn't actually exist. It's just somebody's house. And at least the one I went to. And a bunch of old women gave me a wet cast, totally begrudgingly. They thought I was some drunk American, which I told them I was because I didn't want to tell them about the crime. And I went through about 3 hospitals that night, traveling on a metal gurney with no straps across cobblestone streets in an ambulance that had no shock absorption. I finally got to the hospital that would do my surgery. I found a friend there who helped finagle a discounted operation for me. And the 2 surgeons were named Dr. Vitali and Dr. Wolf. Vitali looked like a vampire with red hair and freckles and this beautiful, beautiful smile, gorgeous blue eyes. And Dr. Wolf looked like a wolf. And come operation day, they told me that I need to check out my equipment. Now this, I need not remind you, Ukraine at the time, and still is, and will probably always be a post-Soviet nation. And as such, there's certain hang-ups they don't really let go of, one of which is how they operate business in a hospital. What I had to do was sit with the doctor and look over a checklist of every piece of equipment they would use on my operation. The screws, the plate, everything. And they finally brought that list over across the street to a pharmacist who came back with all the equipment in a box and put it on my table. And we picked out all the pieces of equipment and checked them off one by one. And finally, I was ready for my operation. I went downstairs into the operation room and finally got my anesthesia. It was spinal anesthesia because they needed to make sure that I wouldn't go under. And during the operation, they put the first laceration in, and I felt every minute of it. The doctor asked me, what did I actually feel? I said, I felt you cut me, doctor. And he said, okay. And we waited 5 minutes, we waited 10 minutes, and he finally said, look, we have to keep going, friend. They blasted up a radio station with 80s music, Fleetwood Mac, anything you could think of at the time, Eurythmics, which was my favorite, and gave me a lot of morphine and chopped away, bringing in a DeWalt 18-volt drill to administer the screws into my leg, and finally sewing me up with sutures that took about a half an hour. After which, I went in the post-op room, and Vitali came by and had this to say to me. He said, Naomi, while I could save your knee, only Jesus could save your soul. Thank you.